Hello YouTube, I saw this video on my TV yesterday. The video is called Top 10 Worst Champions You Should Avoid in Season 13, and I thought about making my own list and comparing it to this list, and if the champions are completely different, their list is probably shit. So I have my list right here. I have 10 worst champions, and what I've said is I've taken 2 champions for each role. But the only ones that I'm not sure of is Yorick, because Yorick just has a low play rate, but I don't know how strong he actually is. But the other ones I basically have a reasoning for, and I'll get into it. So yeah, let's just go into the video.
Top lane, our first pick is going to be Sion. Sion is getting obliterated by many of the meta top laners and is struggling to find any footing. Sion is currently winning less than 45% of the time into the likes of Fiora, Mundo, Darius, and Aatrox, who are extremely popular right now. Fiora and Aatrox are especially bad as their mobility makes it super difficult for Sion to ever land a Q, greatly limiting damage potential.
I think Sion being on their list is not good if Baus makes it to Challenger again with Sion. I did see Baus playing other champions, and this could be the reason why, right? But I don't personally have Sion on the list. Because I tend to have like not a problem with weak side top laners for the most part.
There's simply no reason to pick Sion when you have tanks like Mundo and K'Sante being incredibly strong at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. K'Sante and Mundo are both a lot stronger.
Sion for Season 13 is Akali. Mid lane is definitely much better suited for Akali right now, as she's
Akali is not even a top lane champion, but a mid lane champion, so we'll skip through that one.
But Zed jungle has been torn down more heavily by recent nerfs. Zed's clear speed has become substantially weaker as he not only lost damage on Q and E.
Okay, so we'll just talk about my top lane picks. My top lane picks are Jace, and the reason why it's Jace is because Jace is a strong side champion and is heavily mechanical, and if you don't do a almost pixel perfect combo, then you're just going to lose against tanks no matter what. So the champion is gonna be very, very useless. It does have some scaling, but there's just no point in playing it, and especially because this list is for lower elo. People in low elo can't play Jace. There are simple champions that can do what Jace does even better. My second champion is Yorick, and as I said, the reason why Yorick is here is because I didn't really know any other top laner I wanted to put on the list. So it ended up being Yorick because he just has a very low play rate, and what that means is that he is most likely not gonna get touched in a way. He's not gonna get buffed, he's not gonna get nerfed, so he will stay somewhat the same. So if the meta changes or whatever, it could be bad for him, right? So that's why I put Yorick, but I'm not really sure if it's bad. Like, I think you can still get too highly with Yorick just based off enemies not knowing what your champion does.
Also from the cleave damage being lowered on TMS.
And I'll say that Sett jungle being on the list, I mean, Sett jungle is very much a carry jungler, but he can full clear, and he was quite strong before. He did get some nerfs, yes, but that doesn't mean that he's like the worst champion in the entire game.
Which is obviously a pretty terrible stat line. If you want to play an AD assassin jungler, then Kha'Zix is definitely the better option now that Zed has fallen off. Very much like Zed, Lee Sin's power level was being propped up.
Oh, we actually have a champion that's the same. Lee Sin.
3 times, Lee is starting to feel the pain. In a jungle meta where full clearing has become more optimal, Lee Sin is finding a much more difficult time fitting in. Jungle Treat Gold has been nerfed twice now as well, so it's really nullifying the power of these early game reliant junglers. Playing Lee is pretty coin flip at the moment because you can try to gank early on and snowball your lanes, but if you don't execute, the game is basically over. If you're playing against a jungler who full clears and you end up not getting anything out of your gank, then you fall so far behind in tempo. Unless you're in the higher brackets of play where your team will more reliably win off early game advantages, it makes no sense to pick Lee over a jungler like Mordekaiser. Mord just sits back, full clears, scales super well, and takes way less skill to pull off. The risk is simply not worth the reward of picking Lee Sin, so he's a jungler we would recommend you drop from your champion pool for the start of Season 13. It feels like this champion can never...
Yeah, so for me, I agree with Lee Sin, just based off the fact that it's too highly mechanical of a champion to pull off. Because there are early game champions that are easier, that do pretty much even better ganks than Lee Sin. The only reason why Lee Sin is better than the other champions are because of the fact that you can mechanically outplay opponent, and of course the kick can be really good if you have good mechanics. My secondary champion is Nidalee, and for the exact same reason. She is highly mechanical champion that most people just don't know how to play, and even the players who do play it don't even know how to build on it. So that is a problem as well. So those are the 2 champions that I included, and this was very easy for me to come up with 2 champions for jungle, I will say that. And same thing for mid lane. Mid lane is just Azir and Ryze. Because, yeah, I mean, Azir, very low play rate, very low win rate as well. And the reason why is just because in pro play it's very OP, and they had to nerf it so much in pro play, so that now the champion is just shit in solo queue. And kind of the same thing goes for Ryze. So also very easy to make it for mid lane.
For yet another season, one of the worst mid laners. As a champion with such a high skill ceiling, Azir is extremely difficult for Riot to balance. Whenever Azir even comes close to a 50% win rate in solo queue, he is a definitive pick or ban champ for pro. Pro players that can push Azir to his limits can turn the champion into a top tier pick, but for the majority of solo queue players, this is not attainable. Most solo queue Azir players are only able to pilot him at an average or below average level, and in that case, he's not worth playing over 99% of mid laners. The fact Azir does not have any reliable crowd control or catch tool in his kit makes him an even more volatile pick. If your positioning and mechanics are not on point, then Azir just becomes a walking cannon minion for enemy assassins to feast on. So what it comes down to with Azir is, are you willing to spend countless games of hardship to reap the rewards of mastering the champion? If you're not going to dedicate a ton of time to Azir, then don't even bother playing him, as there are so many easier to execute and stronger mids to choose from. Suffering from many of the same issues that
Azir, we have 3 champions that are the same.
Mid laner for season 13. We were optimistic that the reintroduction of
type
Ages
same.
would help Rise back into a viable spot.
Same.
It hasn't played out that
Same.
way. Analytically speaking, Rod is performing even worse than ever Frost on Rise, so item changes have not been positive for the champ. Similar to Azir, Rise is one of those champions that in the hands of a mastered player becomes 10 times more effective. Fun fact here is that Rise hasn't been a 50% win rate champion for over 5 years, which is a pretty incredible stat. Rise is so difficult to balance for solo queue, as a 46% win rate Rise can still be a pick or ban champion in pro. For that reason, Riot always has to keep Rise in a weaker state for solo queue. If Rise were to become a top tier solo queue mid in his current state, he would be a 100% presence champion in pro without question. Proper spacing is more important on Rise than most mid laners, and the majority of players just can't space well enough. As a shorter range mage, Rise is way more vulnerable than most mages, and with all the catch and long range control power in the game these days, it's so easy to punish an average Rise player. Rise also doesn't have that one big spell he can use for instant AoE impact. You need to be up front, dealing consistent DPS to be effective, which makes Rise difficult for the average mid laner. Moving on to AD carry.
So I pretty much agree with what they said. So for jungle, I somewhat agree. For mid lane, I 100% agree.
There aren't a ton of terribly weak champions in the role at the moment, but Kalista
Yeah, AD
is
carry was
for
also a
Diamond
bit
and
difficult
above,
for me.
Kalista isn't actually that bad of an ADC, but for the
But I'm
majority of
happy that
range,
they have
she's not
Kalista on the
working
list.
tough. Kalista requires much more.
The reason why Kalista's on my list is because, again, champion is just too highly mechanical dependent, and it does not scale whatsoever. So you need to be able to end your game like before 25 minutes. If you want something that's very strong in the early game as AD carry, then I would go for Draven. He's also mechanically reliant, so something else would be Lucian, for example. And then go Lucian Nami, right? And then you can win pretty much every single game. So yeah, that's basically the reason why Kalista's on my list.
For example, Kalista's W passive damage only triggers when you and your support are attacking the same champion. Kalista's ultimate is often difficult for solo queue supports to use optimally, and another tool that they have to worry about on top of their own spells. Being a champion who relies so heavily on winning lane to be more impactful than the enemy ADC makes Kalista a very risky pick. If the game goes to 3 items and you're even with the enemy ADC, it's very likely you're not going to be as effective in team fights as they will. For solo queue, if a champion needs very specific stars to be aligned in order for them to find success, it probably means they aren't the most optimal pick, which is the case for Kalista. Now that Zarya has been buffed and is no longer the worst ADC, taking her crown as one of the marksmen you want to avoid is Aphelios. Aphelios falls into that same category as Ryze and Azir, where he can never.
I don't have any experience on Aphelios, so that's why he's not on my list. But since he got released, he obviously got nerfed a ton, so I don't know how strong he is. It's not a champion I see that much, so could very well be. The reason why I have Ashe on my list is because it's a Season 1 champion, and if you want to play Ashe, it should just be played on support role, because Ashe support is actually very, very strong. Because essentially what you do is you just stack as much ability haste as possible, and then you just perma ulti, and you don't need resources, right? So it's great for like pick off potential, starting off like fights and whatnot. from far away, and that's why Ashe AD carry is on my list, because I think Ashe support is just straight up better. But Aphelios is a very good guess as well. I just don't know enough about Aphelios to say if it's the worst champion for AD carry.
This past season had been especially bad, with Aphelios' win rate never peaking above 46%. In the right hands and in a coordinated environment, Aphelios has so much potential, as his kit is extremely unique. Being able to go from a strong, consistent DPS duelist to a long-range sniper in an instant is something no other ADC can achieve. This constant gun swapping and correct optimization of guns takes a while to get used to, which doesn't make Aphelios very friendly for the average player. Can you make Aphelios work? Sure. Are you putting yourself at an unnecessary disadvantage by playing him? Yes. More commonly seen as a top laner these days, but originally designed as a support, Tahm Kench is an absolute disaster of a support. Tahm is a really weird...
I'll just talk about my list first. I have Sona and Braum. The reason why I have Sona is because I think she's the weakest enchanter out of all of them. I think she does not provide enough heal compared to something like Soraka. The movement speed you can get from other champions, like for example Cillian, and she's very, very squishy, and yeah, it just doesn't seem like a very good pick. And the second support I was actually a little bit unsure of what I wanted to put there, but I ended up putting Braum. And the reason why I put Braum is because I don't think he's that strong in the meta. And typically, back in the day when Braum was released, it was very broken with Lucian. So you would very often see Lucian paired with Braum. But nowadays, you just pair Lucian with Nami, so it doesn't really make sense to pick Braum anymore. So that is the reason why I have those two. Tahm Kench, I somewhat agree. He's not being picked that much, but I wouldn't say he's the very worst, because his ulti can still be very, very strong, and his W can be good for engaging, right? So I wouldn't say he's the worst, but I would say he's below average.
Champion, because he does a lot of things okay, but doesn't excel at anything. For example, Tahm has the slow from Q and knock up from W, but it's not super easy to land, and it's not a very powerful chain CC combo. On the other hand, someone like Maokai has...
Speaking of Lucian Nami, it's on enemy team in this clip.
If you want to play an aggressive melee support, why pick Tahm instead of Maokai? With Tom's ultimate,
because Maokai is better in jungle than support.
But if you want a support who can peel for their carries, why not just play Lulu, who can also buff up their ADC
this makes
at the
sense.
same time? Tom's fallen into some sort of identity crisis, where Riot doesn't know if they want him to be a support who dives in for aggressive engage plays or sits back to protect his carries. This can be fine when piloted by high-level players, but for the average solo queue support, not having a clear idea of how you should be playing is just unnecessary fog. With Janna, it's plain and simple. Just sit back and protect your carries from dive champions. With Amumu, you're looking for those angles where you can dive in and hit a nice multi-man ultimate. As for Tahm, it's never as cut and dry, so he takes way more brain power to make work than the majority of supports. Once one of the most reliable
and Braum is on the list as well.
Has lost his touch over the past while. When you take a look at the highest win rate melee supports right now, we see Amumu, Maokai, Blitzcrank, and Pyke. One thing all these champions have that Braum doesn't is the ability to deal a considerable amount of damage. Braum just lacks the ability to single out targets and chunk them for a large portion of their health bar. Not only can Amumu
see again Lucian Nami on enemy team,
but he can nearly 100-0 an enemy squishy with his full combo. Braum can't even reliably chain CC someone unless his teammates help him out, which is not a recipe for success in solo queue. It goes back to what we were talking about for Tahm Kench, where Braum has decent peel power and decent CC, but doesn't excel at either. If you want to have success with a melee support in solo queue, then playing someone with that instant catch power is proving to be way more effective. The only time we'd really recommend you play Braum is if you can duo up and be on the same page as your ADC. Jumping onto minions with Braum W and finding engages onto the enemy that way can be very powerful, but it's way harder to coordinate than just hitting a hook with Blitz. Alright guys, before we wrap this up, let's tell you a little more.
So we ended up agreeing on 5 champions, 1 for jungle, 2 on mid, 1 on AD carry, and 1 on support. So overall, not a very bad list. This is actually a somewhat good list. But they, once again, heavily focus on win rate. And win rate alone does not determine if a champion is good or bad. But they did say one good thing, and that is that the champions might necessarily be like that bad, but you're putting yourself in an unfavorable situation, right? It's better to pick something that's easy compared to picking something that's very difficult if the outcome of learning something easy and something difficult is the same. What I will say is that you can probably, I've said this before, you can get to diamond with any role and any champion, and I believe everyone can do it, as long as you're not having some sort of handicap in terms of insanely high ping, insanely low FPS, something like that, right? So you can get to diamond even by playing these champions. The difference is just they take a lot longer to learn and a lot longer to master, which means that instead of you being able to get diamond in, let's say, a few hundred games, it might be closer to 1,000. So you can get to diamond if you really, really want to with these champions, but I heavily suggest that you do not play these champions and just pick something that is a little bit easier, because it will make your win rate a little bit higher and it will make you a better player faster so that you can climb faster as well. But if you guys want, they also made a top 10. They regularly make like tier lists. So if you want me to react to one or make my own and compare it to theirs, then type best champions in the comment section, and then I will make a top 10 best champions or whatever and compare to one of theirs. But if you enjoyed the video, remember to like, and then yeah, once again, type best champs if you want the top 10 best champions, and then subscribe to not miss out on future videos. And then I just hope to see you guys in my next YouTube video. And yeah, bye bye.